we're getting back to. This notion that if you want software, you're going to have to accept the pollution that comes with it. You've got no choice, but really nothing is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. As a society in the 1960s, we chose to no longer tolerate pollution as a sign or a symbol of prosperity. We made a communal decision expressed through the Congress and the Senate. Other countries have not made that choice yet. China hasn't, Moscow hasn't, I'm sorry, Russia hasn't. A lot of other, it's not their fault. I'm not blaming them. The notion is they want to get somewhere and they're willing to spend and take whatever costs necessary to get there. And until their society makes a switch in choice, they will continue to get pollution. So too is the same thing in the ecosystem of the internet. We tolerate far too many vulnerabilities. This isn't about perfect software. It's about, as a society, how many vulnerabilities are we going to tolerate? All right, second rule, or second lesson here. You reduce pollution at the source. You look at the source, not at the downstream components. Okay, trying to regulate the downstream components is ridiculous. It's like requiring all of you to wear gas masks, which is really what we require of all of our endpoints. You got to wear gas masks. But we don't call them gas masks. We call them firewalls and antivirus and everything else. Okay? We expect people to protect themselves against pollution-emitting devices. This is the focus of majority of U.S. cybersecurity strategy. It is all downstream elements, and it is all about the peoples, the drivers, the fishes, the streams. We're laying out plastic tarps as a nation, wondering why it still keeps raining, when a refocus is necessary. It's not that we ignore software security, it's that we don't really address the sources of pollution sufficiently enough to make any of the spend over here truly effective. Third lesson, regulation is monstrously inefficient, but it's less inefficient than no regulation. People, if they don't have to pay for the private cost of their behavior, won't. Basically, in a public policy initiative, we have to balance social costs against private costs. And when private costs are too low and the social costs are too high, we need to adjust the pricing mechanisms and expenditures in the marketplace. If you look at this, if the private cost of listening to music is too low, while the social cost is very high, we regulate it. We put in a Pagovian tax that readjusts the pricing mechanism, because it might not cost you a whole lot to buy that stereo system or to play it really loudly, but we will adjust the social cost by fining you. The private cost of smoking may be too low, while the social cost may be very high in terms of secondhand smoke or in terms of medical costs to chronic smokers, but we readjust the pricing mechanism. We raise the private cost of smoking by taxing the living daylights out of cigarettes. Okay? The same thing with traffic congestion. The price of owning a car may be too low, but the social cost too high in terms of pollution or congestion, so some countries put in pricing mechanisms to readjust or rebalance the private and social costs that's in the marketplace. The private cost of manufacturing may be too low, while the social costs in forms of pollution are too high, so what do? Again, we readjust the pricing mechanism so that you pay for the cost of your private behavior. So pollution is a sign of monstrously inefficient manufacturing processes, okay? And producing software is monstrously inefficient. We still have this craftsman-like mentality that would think, oh, we'll make these artful things. And yeah, they're artful, but they're just emitting vulnerabilities left, right, and center into the atmosphere. Without an industrialization mechanism, some way of producing clean software, dare I use that word, we're going to continue to get enormous amounts of inefficiencies in the software market. We have an oversupply of insecure software and an undersupply of everything else. And from a public policy perspective, that can be devastating. Fourth lesson, progress will always seem muddled. In the US, we've made tremendous advances against acid rain and sulfates. If you look at the amount of smog here in the south, in the LA basin, okay? In the 1970s, you would have over 200 days, or more than 2/3 of your days, filled with eye-watering, throat-choking smog. Now, it's much, much less than that. So yeah, it's not great, but it's a heck of a lot better than what it used to be. And that's important. We've made a tremendous amount of progress in the United States around pollution control. Okay? The problem here is, though, that we've become so good that 15% of our pollution now in the air comes from China. Okay? We're so good that we can actually measure the amount of pollution being injected into our airspace by other countries. It's not China's fault. It's not our fault. They're trying to mirror our success. And if you want to be prosperous, you have to pollute. That is the paradigm that ultimately China will have to confront at some point. Even Indonesia. This is the smog cloud off of Indonesia in 1997. Okay? I mean, the Indian Ocean is basically one big carbon sink. Okay? So this is the notion that even though we may make a lot of progress as individual nations, it is still a global issue. And that even though we might do something well, there's lots of negative externalities for those countries that choose not to. This is not a blame game. It's realizing how do we start affecting the marketplace on a global scale to do this. And this is the problem we're going to have in software. You're going to have the Microsofts, the Mozillas, you're going to have all those folks trying really hard, and then any other manufacturer can come into the space and produce crap software and still take market share. And that is a huge inefficiency in this marketplace. Fifth lesson, don't be annoying. Okay, green folks, right? Not exactly the guys you want at your party, okay? Because they're all about whatever, right? And they're greener than now in many ways, all right? They walk to work, they take a Segway, they use, environmentally friendly toilet paper, and of course, then they start blaming everybody else for basically not being as green as they are. In this case, American taste for soft toilet rolls worse than driving Hummers. Now, of course, this might seem kind of stupid to us because not too many people I know are going to give up two-ply toilet paper and perceive that it's worse than driving software. But this is really the kind of same annoying stuff that we see in the software market, because you've always got your uber elite hacker who's totally into ninjas, all right, doing all his stuff, but then we come out with this BS. Okay? Oh, don't click on that link. You might as well tell people not to use two-ply toilet paper. That's how you're going to come across. When we go in front of executive board members, this is what we look like. All right? This is what we look like because we start giving advice to people that makes no sense to them whatsoever. Sixth rule, people will not vote against themselves. Thank you. People will not vote against themselves. And this is in keeping with the previous rule. That you might be green, you might be uber secure, but other people will not vote against themselves. What that means is that you might encourage biking to work or even walking to work. You might even encourage people to take smart cars. But if they perceive the utility of a smart car to be less than another car that they could buy that they feel they'd be safer in, they won't choose it. Okay? So, this is the same mentality we see. Why do we have such bad traffic here in LA? Basically this, everybody's thinking the same thing. If these idiots would just take the bus, I could be home by now. If everybody else did it, I would be better off. But people don't vote against themselves. They're happy to tell you what you need to do, but they're not going to do it themselves. And in computer security, we see the same thing. What part of computer seems to be causing the security problem? Obviously, the nut behind the keyboard. But this is a pernicious issue that we have in the cybersecurity community. Users are not stupid. They are self-interested. They will not vote against themselves. They will click on that link. Why? Because their friend just sent them a PDF, and they will click on it. And no matter how many times to tell them not to click on something, they will not vote against themselves. You need to give them systems that allows them to make the right choices or not make any choice at all. I know, freedom of clicking, right? You don't want to harm that. But this is what we see in computer security all the time. Yeah, I know there are security issues, but it's so feature-rich, I'm willing to overlook them. This is constantly what we see. We give people insecure systems, and they will not choose something else. They will open that codec. They will open that MP4, that Trojan MP4. They will take that JPEG file. They will open that PDF because they are trying to do something with their lives via that clicking. People are trying to make themselves better off, and they will not choose consciously to make themselves worse off, and they will not listen to you when you ask them to make themselves worse off. They will not forego clicking, period. So let's just pull that advice off of every website that I can think of. All right. 7th rule, inspire, don't shock. Okay, Al Gore, terrifying movie, right? Didn't do a whole lot. Whereas Adam Werbach's whole notion of integrating with the business and getting close to the core strategy of the business so that you can gain competitive advantage, that's a message that industry started listening to, okay? But in cyberspace, Man, FUD is all we have as security practitioners. Oh, we banty words around like risk and ROI, but it's all BS, and the business guys know that when we start putting those words around because they know we don't know a damn thing about business. Okay, we do this all the time. We talk about, the ever-seeing eye of Google, Microsoft, and ActiveX, and all the other worms and viruses. That's our cudgel. Okay, how do we inspire? Well, that leads us to the 8th lesson. The 8th lesson is money talks. If you want to inspire global companies to start producing better software, money talks. Basically, here we see in Capitalism at the Crossroads this statement: pollution control devices can never improve efficiency or produce revenue. They can only add cost. All you have to do is switch the words out really quick, and you see that security controls will never, never be a darling of the business. They will never be a darling of the business. They may be necessary from our perspective, but the business will treat them as a liability, which they are. All right? So here's my huge, mega, no-op water slide into a bunch of shell code that we're so hot and heavy over. Show this to the business, they could care less. Because what kind of outputs do they care about? This. It's all about this every quarter, every year, along with their cumulative scorecard called the balance sheet. It is all about the income statement, and the greening movement talked to the bottom line, but the sustainability movement talked to the top line. And in security, we try to comfort ourselves by saying we're helping with the bottom line, but the revolution will come when we figure this one out. And I haven't done that yet, and hopefully somebody will, because that's when you'll see the 4th age of sustainable security, which we're not quite there yet with. 9th lesson, basically, this is all intertwined. If you put technology solutions out there, people will not necessarily adopt them because it affects them socially or culturally or economically. It's too expensive for them to do it. Okay, that's why you see companies aggressively managing compliance expenditures. Okay, because why? It doesn't touch on any of the other things here. They will fight against you if we do not look holistically at security. And then finally, the 10th rule is thrive no matter what. Thrive in perpetuity. What sustainability is not making a few companies rich, it is about making everybody rich. The story of pollution control is really ultimately a story about increasing the welfare of humanity. And that's truly what I believe the software industry can do. That they're infantile in the sense that it's still new, they can do a lot better, but this is about making the Microsofts, the Apples, the Oracles, the Firefoxes all more powerful and more successful rather than less. Okay, this is about everybody thriving in perpetuity. It's about creating a digital infrastructure, an ecosystem that is robust and survivable despite the malicious elements out there, despite the reactions, the malicious reactions of chemical hacking, whatever terms we might want to interject and interleave together. It's this notion of thriving in perpetuity. And that's what we can do in security, and that's what we can do in the technology space if we start applying the same lesson learned again and again and again. People will not vote against themselves. Companies will not vote against themselves. You have to create a systemic answer to insecurity, just like pollution or auto safety or safety in pharmaceuticals. A systemic answer is where the U.S. has been traditionally weak. And we need to see the big picture. So hopefully what this talk gives you is a big overview. The notion that we really are at a threshold here. That Microsofts, the Adobes, the Apples, they're all starting to get it. But it's not the end of the story. We're only greening at this point in the software industry. And we need to kill green at some point and go blue. And the multinationals, the big software companies, are really the ones to pull this off because they have cross-jurisdictional capabilities that the federal government will never have, no matter whose federal government we're talking about. So we really are, as I keep saying, this is about us. It's not about the no-op slides. It's not about pen testing. Those are all tactical things, and they're important, and we shouldn't forego them. But ultimately, if we want to succeed, ultimately we have to acknowledge our humanity in this technological race. Because if we fail to do that, we will keep voting ourselves out of it and wondering why we're not succeeding.